Today we're going to do grand hammer hanging. So we do lots and lots of rebuilding, including new hammers. So the piano that Brian is working on is that Steinway right there. Let's check it out real quick. Scott's in the back looking for some good hammers. Okay. So, Brian's sort of on the tail end of restringing. This is 1923-24 Steinway, and mostly done with the strings, just a few little adjustments here and there. And then he's going to be installing this set of genuine Steinway hammers, which Scott is going to give us a little tutorial. Scott probably installs more grand hammers here than just about anyone, and so he's gonna talk about his techniques. So what's been done so far, when the hammers are new, none of this shaping and the boring, this angle here, the rough tail, none of that is done. This is all just one big kind of squared off. There's an example. That's how they start. And then we have all of these different 3D print the hammers. So Scott, you want to talk about this stuff, and then let's start hanging if we're ready. These have been voiced. Yep. Okay. And sanded. Okay, great.
So you want to talk about the arcing and the coving?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that we can just talk about, and then I think for the actual hanging, let's actually do that.
Yeah.
The hanging.
Mm-hmm.
So you always keep the section ends from the old hammers to get all the angles correct, and then we have several different jigs that we use to first to bore the hole for the hammer shank, and that's just done on the drill press, and that's a very specific location, and that's another thing you use the old section ends for. And then we just have...
Why not get some of those jigs?
Yeah, sure.
Easier to visualize as you talk about it.
Yeah, so there's several different jigs we use for each different section.
How many hours does it take you to get hammers ready like this? Prep.
It's a few. I'd have to think about it, but maybe like 3 or 4. Maybe more, depending on the set. These ones were nice because they came already done, so it saves a lot of time. But I assume they're more expensive anyway. So.
I'm sure they are.
So there's a few different ways to do the cove. It's this section here. Looks like they used some kind of sander. So we usually do that on the drill press. You can use like a Forstner bit or a hole saw to just kind of cut out that section. And then the arcing, which is this kind of angle here, that's done on the belt sander. It's a jig that just kind of, you stick a bit in there and it moves like that across the sander, so it creates that arc. Here's the jigs. So this is the boring jig. This is how you get the hole.
Pay attention.
So there's quite a few different adjustments here. So you stick the hammer in like that. This sets exactly where the hole is. That direction. So it goes in and clamps down. And again, you just set it with the old hammers that you have to set the location.
So why do you do the boring first?
Because several of the other jigs use that hole. particularly this one. This is the arcing jig, and you set the hammer just on top of that, and then put it on the sander. But we'll get to that.
And then also this holds the square hammer, right?
Hmm?
The hammer, the tail has to be square to be held in the
Right.
jig. In the jig.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so if you did like the boring first, that would kind of mess with it. Or the tapering before the boring. So then you also set the angle like this. They start out straight here, but as the strings curve, then the angle of the hammers change slightly, so you'll go a little bit up to the angle that the old hammers were.
Can you guys see
Can't really see what angle these are at. So that's a pretty slight angle. I don't know if you can tell. But it's just a little bit off a square. Usually they're a bit more than this, but it kind of depends on the piano. I guess this is a little bit longer than a lot of pianos I do, so it would have less of an angle. So that's the boring jig. I have to remember each time. And there's one more jig too, the coving jig.
it? Oh, yeah. Here it is.
Yeah. So this is the one I was talking about that does the inside cove here. So that you kind of set in, I guess, like this. And you clamp it down to the drill press, and then you have I usually use a hole saw to kind of carve out that inside edge.
Looks like they have an additional
They use something else, maybe some kind of sander. It's a different shape.
jig.
Is it a
Yeah.
special bit that you're talking about for that?
Do you know what the hole saw is? It's like it's a hollow kind of thing with a serrated edge.
I'll get that. Yeah, that does look.
I'm not sure how they do this.
It's like how you get ice cores and hot cores.
Yeah.
So do you do the cove second, or do you do that last?
I have to remind myself. So it's the boring first, and then the coving and the arcing. They're the ones I get mixed up. They go next. Those two may not matter. Let's see. I do the arcing next, and then the coving after that. Because the arcing is kind of a set thing, more or less. And the coving, you can kind of adjust to exactly how much you want to take off. And if you did the coving first and then the arcing, you may have taken off too much and not realized it.
Okay. What's the purpose of the coving on a hammer?
Weight, maybe? I'm not really sure.
Tradition, yeah, maybe weight.
Okay.
It looks cool.
It does look nice.
All right.
It's at an angle.
That's a hole
Does it
saw.
Like arc when it moves, so it needs to like follow that movement.
Well, that's the arc. That's this arc here.
What are you talking about?
We're talking about the coving under the.
Yeah.
Yes, I actually use something about that size. That
Any
takes off the
technicians
inside.
watching that might know the reason for the coving? It's a 5-to-1 weight ratio. So if you take off, let's see, if you take off an ounce on the hammer, it changes or a gram rather, on the hammer, it changes your touch weight by 5 grams
Okay.
with
That's
all of the
Interesting.
all of the arcs. So a gram is not very much, right? A gram is like maybe a washer or something, a small washer.
Mm.
It's a grand. Of course, wood is much less dense than the metal washer, but
A small handful of flour.
small handful of flour is a grand, yeah. So if your touch weight is, I don't know, you want to shoot for a touch weight of 70 grams, something like that, 70 down weight. So you can bring that touch weight down quite a bit by messing with the hammers.
And that's assuming all your pinning and springs are consistent and
Yeah,
all those kind of things.
that's right. And that your humidity is absolutely precision consistent.
Yeah. Okay. Order these right. Someone found this, huh? This was lost for a long time.
Yeah, I don't know.
Cool.
Where it was.
So I made one of these just because this was lost, and then someone lost that. So then Bryce made this one.
No, we'll have like 4 of them by the
So,
time we're done.
That's great. This one's a lot better because it's bigger. So this is the arcing jig. This and this go together. So once the hammer's bored, you stick it on this drill bit, or just any drill bit that fits.
We use a drill bit because we can get it to fit very snug.
And you want to put it slightly below the surface of it because you're going to put this on the sander. And if it's above the surface, it'll get sanded like it has. So just slightly below the surface there. And then there's a little set screw on the side here that holds it in place.
Which doesn't affect the drill bit,
No,
Unless you do it a lot.
but it'll
eventually.
affect your sanding.
Yeah. So then you clamp this to the table of the sander, and then this has a groove on the inside that goes along that.
Tell me what the adjustments that you can make.
I mostly just do it with how I clamp this. So I'll just clamp this back or forward a little bit. It also has, all right, so this screw sits kind of the arc, how big or small the arc is. So you can adjust a little bit how much you're taking off. It doesn't make a huge difference because it's such a small surface area, but you can adjust that a little bit.
Take off most of the mosquitoes and insects. I don't want those.
So that goes against the belt sander, and then turn on the sander, push it forward, and then just make the arc like that. It's pretty simple. So that I do,
It makes it look faster.
it's about that fast once you get going.
The shape of it, I mean, that's why it's done.
So I do them in that order, and then
Yeah.
tapering.
Aerodynamic.
Tapering is last, which we typically just do on the bass hammers. Some of the ones we get have it done on all of them. I've seen some pianos that have it on all of them. I'm not sure why they do it on the straight ones, you know.
Makes it look faster.
Yeah.
Could be a weight thing.
Yeah, it's
It
like
could
putting
be.
a thing on the back of your $3,000 car.
Yeah, I don't know.
Does look nice.
It's so what Scott was talking about in the bass, where you have more of an extreme angle on each of the hammers, or usually not on these hammers, but usually your boring is more of an angle. The taper is required for clearance as each hammer comes up, because they're at an angle, more like that, I guess. And they come up. If they're not tapered on the end there, they kind of rub on each other. But if they're tapered, then there's space clearance. But on the hammers that are straight, that are just going straight up and down, the taper isn't really necessary. But it's
Yeah, not for clearance at least.
not for clearance, yeah.
Mm.
Yeah.
So I don't
So here again, that's a question for Jim Busby is a a regular viewer, if Jim, you have any ideas of why a taper and a cove would be necessary. The cove necessary at all,
Keep the weight consistent.
and why a taper would be necessary on non-angled hammers. It'd be good to know. Be interesting.
And you still angle the back checks with it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's right.
So that angle's arbitrary, or
The angle is not arbitrary. You want the angle to be relatively close to matching the angle of the strings, and so
like the
So,
drill
you
angle.
can have it fan to match. Like Ben, I don't know where he got it. He just started doing it. It wasn't my instruction. Have you seen what Ben does with a big
He writes
dry
down all the
erase?
angles.
Yeah, he writes down
Yeah.
all the angles. So what he does is, I think what he's doing, like in this section, is he'll match all of these angles where it's not extreme, and he writes them down, and he makes the appropriate changes by a tenth of a degree.
Tenth of a degree?
Uh-huh.
That's pretty
How do you
precise.
even set that on the jig?
I don't know. I'll have to ask him.
So a degree is each one of these little
Yeah.
lines. It's a degree. I don't know how you'd cut that in tenths.
I think he just estimates, like, if he's at, 4.2 degrees, he just kind of estimates it.
I've tried doing halves before, but I usually just do one at a time.
Do two at a time.
I don't know.
There's always
I think the old ones are
movement.
a lot less accurate than that. They'll make bigger jumps. But
And he, I think there's more play in the hammer itself than,
That's
there's
true.
probably 1 degree each direction,
at least.
at least in play.
If the shanks didn't vary in thickness or shape, it
Yeah.
depends.
I think that's a case of, I don't know, he's probably just being overly precise, but his hammers sure look
Nothing
good.
wrong with that.
Yeah. And so you can't necessarily match the angle. Like if the angle of these
Yeah, it's always
strings
less
is
of an angle.
15 degrees or something, you might kind of split the difference. You might do like a 7 or 8 or 10 degree angle of the hammers to sort of match the strings. It won't really work if you have the full 15 degree. You just have clearance problems.
I think the highest I've ever seen is 15.
Yeah.
The old hammers were drilled at. They're usually more like 10 in the base, and then usually close to that on the break.
I don't know if how it exactly works, but it seems to me like the more angle you put it at, the more extreme angle, the more it arcs, and the more chance it
The more
has.
the swath
Yeah,
of the hammer
yeah.
takes
So
up.
it takes up a lot of space.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Can you hit the other hammers, or it
Yeah.
ends up being you have to make the spacing and alignment way
Yeah,
off from where the string is.
And there's much less room for error or room for changes
Yeah.
to be kind of affected by things to be affected by humidity or whatever, just the way things change. So you think of like a spinet where the angle of the strings themselves are really extreme.
It's like the third set of hammers that I ever did on the spin.
Oh,
They're
yeah,
so close together.
yeah,
Like even the Foster right there has a pretty extreme angle on the base.
yeah, it does.
So hammers would be much less than that.
Does that maybe like a 30-degree?
I've seen them in the 30s. I've tried to measure it before.
Usually don't go over 16 anymore.
Yeah. So that's why we taper. So that's the side of the hammer.
Mm.
It's not straight anymore. So we have 2 different jigs for this. Forward two different machines. So this one is the table saw jig, and this is the one that goes on the belt sander. Although you could probably make it work on the table saw too. It's not too bad.
And the third,
Oh yeah,
the high-tech.
the original bass hammer tapering jig, which is kind of a early version of this, I guess. I kind of remember it.
How it
Would you slide the hammer? Is that how it was?
Yeah.
I remember you clamped that down.
Yeah, you just climb, you find the right spot, clamp it down, and then put your hammer, if you have your wheel right here, you find the right spot to clamp it down, and you just, let's see, no, you have your wheel like that, coming around, so the edge of the wheel would probably be about there, and then this is clamped down in the same spot, and then you just hold this, and just slide that there, and then flip it around, and
Yeah.
then slide it again. And that keeps it consistent. Yeah, you have to watch your fingers.
Yeah. And I remember trying to like keep it straight, but the sander's pulling it down. And
That's right. That's right. Kind of have to hold it up.
so with this one, it's set up for uprights now. So this was originally a grand jig, and then was it Joe that added another screw that made it useful for uprights?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Used to be a flat screw too that put the round screw on so it doesn't twist the hammer. Tended to twist it off.
Mhm. So one of these two screws in here goes up and down to set the how much you're taking off, so you can set the angle that direction. And then this one's just a stop.
And or the sliding bar.
Right, you can adjust this as well for how close it is to the sander. I typically don't mess with that because it's pretty much where it needs to be. So that goes in like that, up against the screw, and then this is just a clamp, holds it down like that. And then you just set it in the track of the sander. You go through and it sands off the corner.
And clean off the sander after every pass. And then you don't stain your felt, or at least very noticeable.
How does that work?
Yeah.
Nice.
Um,
We should try that.
I
What do you
think
clean it with?
Just the rubber, just like one or two quick passes with the rubber after each
That's a good
hammer
idea.
pass.
So I've been kind of doing a workaround for that, but that's a better idea. So I've just been going in like right at the very corner and just taking off a little bit, so I don't go across the whole sander. But I'm gonna try that. Because if you don't do that, the side of the felt gets all covered in sawdust, and it's kind of hard to clean off.
And even afterwards, it still get compressed air blow off each
Yeah.
hammer, and then you can get it even cleaner.
Does it work just so to blast the?
I'm sure it would. It's another
Just
step.
Yeah. Just a hassle.
Yeah. So that's the sander jig. And then this one I've used a couple times. It works much better when the blade is sharp. If it's not, then it'll burn your hammers pretty good. Which is what happened the last time I used it. So it's set up so you can do two at a time.
You can do one side,
Right.
and you kind of put them through.
Mhm. So you'll start with just one hammer.
One is for the opposite side and
Yes.
one is for the.
Like special stones that you can run on the blades that like keep them sharp. Yeah, on the table saw.
That's a bad idea.
Maybe that's a rock saw.
They sharpen teeth by grinding off the face so that you don't change the thickness of the blade.
Good to know.
So the setup on this is very similar, where it has one screw for the angle and then another one just as a stop. It's adjustable, so you can move the screw to different places if the hammers are slightly different sizes. It's just a very small Allen kind of screw. And so yeah, you set up one side how you want it, run it through the table saw, and then flip it over. set up the second side to where you want it. You're gonna have to make it a little bit taller because it took off some of the wood. And then at that point, you can put a new one in here and then run through both at the same time and then just kind of keep moving them through. So it's a little more setup time, but once it is set up, it goes very quickly. And then this just rides up against the fence of the table saw. So you also have to set exactly where the fence is and how much it's taken off. But it's a pretty good jig.
Do the same people make all of these jigs?
No. Renner, Spurlock.
Yeah, okay.
I think just those two.
Pieces of plastic with holes drilled through 'em.
Looks like
Yeah, how could they be hundreds of dollars if they're just pieces of plastic with holes drilled through them? Wow. What a ripoff.
They're kosher.
Delrin's pretty expensive, so it's.
Yeah, it is actually.
It's really, it's quality machinable plastic.
Mm.
I think I bought a 4x8 sheet
Vigorously
once.
correct terminology.
Maybe it was a 2x4 sheet, but it was like $200 or something.
what's it made of? What is it called?
Delrin?
Delrin?
Delrin. It's
Okay.
Delrin is a brand name, but there are high density machinable plastics. A lot of these white plastics are that kind of material. But Delrin is a specific kind of brand and quality of plastic specifically made for machining. And it's pretty tough. The machinist we had at my program for grad school had a metal lathe machine where one of the gears had broken because someone put one of the settings wrong and turned it on and it broke the gears. They machined a new gear out of Delrin and it was
Wow.
sufficient to run the machine.
That's amazing.
So it's quality material, but they use it a lot because it's very low friction. So for things like gears and cogs, it's nice because it doesn't wear in the same way as steel does, and it machines really cleanly. Some of the other high density plastics leave a lot of weird kind of burrs or doesn't cut off as cleanly, so they have a lot of surface irregularities sometimes after machining.
We have, yeah, it kind of does feel like, we have a piece maybe about that big, it has some holes drilled in it, with the idea that if people wanted to make jigs out of it, you can.
That's what I made partially the jig for using resin. And that stuff doesn't, like the resin will stick to it, but you can like hit it with a hammer and it knocks it right off. It's like anti-stick kind of.
Can you cook with it too?
Plastics.
It's magic.
Carcinogen.
Probably not.
I think that's about it on these.
Alright, it's cool jigs.
So these two are a little less important, the order, but this is basically the order I use them in.
Nice.
Alright. Let's get to hanging.
That's another jig.
stuff is still on the on the keys.
Some jigs to make.
There it is.
That stuff's nice. It is
Be a good cutting board for sure.
It would be a good cutting board.
We should know the hammers for consistency. It's thick stuff.
It is thick stuff.
That's really thick. Wow.
Do you remember what we cut these for? So next time you need to make a jig, let's
Okay.
use this. Although pin block material works pretty well too.
It
That's true. That's usually what we end up using, huh?
Well, that's the.
All right, Scott.
Yeah.
This rail out of the way.
If I stand over.
So I usually like to start on the high treble end because these are all straight up and down without an angle. It's a little bit easier to start there.
Okay.
And I like to clamp it to the table just because if someone comes by and bumps it, then you have to reset everything, which is kind of annoying.
So in the back we have somewhere between 20 and 25 skid boards.
That's a lot.
Are these all the hammers? And I need the ones at the bottom, of
Oh,
course.
whoops. Sorry.
I just like to start on the high treble.
Okay.
Just 'cause
Can
they're
we
straight.
open the box from the other side?
It's a bit easier up here, so it's nice to start there and get the hang of it before you get to the angled ones.
Yay!
'88, which we're not using yet.
You want me to take them out and order them for you?
Yeah, that'd be great. Oh, that's right. They do come pre-numbered, which is nice.
They were still a little bit cut to the top, so. But it was, you could see some sanding that they had done, so I don't know.
Is so it's this rail in the front, and then folds the top so it'll be against this edge and against this edge. Kind of sets the angle for exactly where it's going to sit. So we'll start by setting them just right where the old hammers are. So there's a piece of glue in the way. sides.
Mm.
So
And s-
are you basically centering the woods together?
Yes.
Gotcha.
Yeah, so you kind of, and then you end up setting this to the new hammer instead of the old hammer.
Buenos
Hola,
dias.
Julio.
How are you?
Cansado, pero bien.
Cansado?
Entonces ya.
Did you find 71? Or sorry, 73? Okay, so that's the one on the other end. Do the same thing.
He said he needs to be done. I remember his tuning. Okay, his tuning fork was like left in it for like 4 days. So like tuned in the upper, no lower, and he's like, I can't remember if I finished it. So maybe he didn't.
I think he,
Cause yeah,
he only raised the pitch, and then Jake
got it.
did the block. Right, Jake? Didn't you do this one?
Mm-hmm.
That
So
makes
just out of
sense.
curiosity, looks like the angle of these bass strings are about 37 degrees.
It's pretty.
I think you did another tuning after I did a pen block treatment on it.
There's a special thing that I did to it to make the angle so they don't rub against each other at the extreme angle. So they might be different in how the hammer butt
It's pretty cool.
relates to them.
Maybe even close to 40. Did you put the googly eyes in the mouth on all of those donuts? It wasn't daylight donuts. that
No, I
did
did that to make it fun. Yeah,
I like it.
we're hanging hammers. It's like so
that.
perfect.
Oh, yeah, right.
I'll have to think of next week something like, I don't
Some kind of potion.
Ooh,
Like this.
this is voicing potion. That is-
know. A voicing potion. There you go. Making potions for voicing. I made some good apple cider last night though. It's yummy.
Sounds good. So I got the jig set for this section.
All right.
And you have to go just kind of one section at a time. So when you put the hammer on, I stick my finger under here, push it up against that edge, and then kind of pull it back against that edge. And then you look at it to make sure it's straight.
And this height is made so that this is 0 degrees.
It's about
like
parallel, yeah.
horizontal to the ground. Sort of thing.
I don't know if it matters if it's exactly horizontal, because you'll be setting it to the angle of this, wherever it happens to be.
Oh, okay.
So even if it's slightly lower, you'll just be setting it to the lower angle.
How come we don't use a jig like this for uprights?
We do. It's the shanking jig. But it has two different glue joints, where a grand only has the one. So these don't have hammer butts.
Yeah.
So there you have to, a lot easier.
More precise mechanisms.
Mhm. Have you traveled these shanks? It's probably easier to do with hammers on anyway. You know how to do that upside down?
Move the action, see whether they move apart or close together.
Yeah, that's right. Just be sure to clean the surface really well.
Okay.
I was thinking the same thing too. Probably travel them
After.
after the hammers are on.
Yeah, I agree.
I was thinking the same
Are you
thing.
talking about the tool that twists this or putting paper underneath it?
No, putting paper in
So I like to keep a paper towel and some toothpicks around just to help clean up any glue drips.
that's a good tip. That's a good pro tip.
Pro tip.
Tim.
Okay, let's do a couple.
TM.
And so with new shanks, the shank's always going to be sticking out a little bit once you glue it on. And then you cut those off after everything dries.
Which actually makes another point of greater precision, right? One less thing that you have to worry about. Whereas shank length on uprights is crucial.
Mm-hmm.
And also the depth of, and you're also assuming that the depth of the bore and the hammer butt on the upright
Right?
is totally consistent.
There's a lot of
Whereas
variables.
There's a lot more variables. In this, you don't have to worry about any of that.
That's nice.
It's just nice.
So I ended up just cutting the shank slightly short besides the two section.
And it slides to bore his deep, so you have.
Yeah, but then you end up having too deep of a hammer.
Well, it's kind of the same difference, isn't it? You can make the hole bigger or the shank shorter.
Shank shorter.
Alright, so set 88 aside, 'cause that's our sample one. We'll put that in later. Starting with 87. So I like to put a little bit of glue on the inside of the hammer. It's not terribly necessary, but sometimes
Quick and thick.
sometimes if you don't do that, then once you put it on, it'll end up with a slight little gap on the back. And so that's to try and help fill that in. And yeah, this is a rather thick glue, which also helps kind of fill in any gaps you might have. And it also dries faster, which is nice.
Those little syringes might fit in there pretty.
So just put a little bit in there.
And you do it straight out of the bottle.
I do. Spread it out a little bit. Put some on the B, about like that. And then go quick before it drips. Put the hammer on. Spin it around a couple times. And then put it up against your jig. This looks like it may have moved slightly.
Do you want to clamp it to the table? Oh, you did.
I clamp this. I don't usually clamp the action.
Now, it looks like the hammer on the other side is,
It is slightly off. There's some glue under here that was getting in the way.
let's see.
That isn't going up to my rail.
Feel the pressure.
So the crucial, Scott might have talked about this already, maybe when I was over there. Well, there are a number of important dimensions. I'd say the most crucial, Scott, tell me if you disagree, is probably the strike point.
I agree.
So that vertical angle.
Well, the line where the hammer actually strikes the string. So the old hammer might have a slightly different shape or a slightly different size or slightly different this or that. But as long as that strike point is the same,
That's the end goal.
that's the end goal. Yeah.
Sound good. The angle, as long as it sounds good.
Yeah.
Feels good. Whatever you have to do.
This wasn't lining up for some reason. So you have a very small window where you can correct any mistakes. So,
Especially with that glue.
yes. So when in doubt, pull it off and try again. So a lot of times, especially when you bore them yourselves, the angle might be correct, but you may need a little bit more play to get it to line up exactly with the old hammer angle.
Do you
I think Brigham might be getting the tool I want.
What's that?
The little reamer tool.
That like
There's
U-shaped one.
this,
There's also that one.
and there's the,
This one. Yes. I'm maybe thinking something different.
This one, that tool's one.
I use it to, that's for,
Clean it up after. It's about that long. It's a reamer.
so it can't be too far.
Okay. Thanks. Can shave off a little bit of the shank like that. Just enlarges the hole a little bit.
Just to give you a little bit more play.
Yeah, exactly.
God.
If you need it to go a certain direction like that, you can kind of angle it like that on the tool and it'll just cut off the
Nice.
sides that you need.
Never knew we
Little
had
more
a
clearance
tool
on.
like that.
Pretty cool.
It may not work since it's tapered for whatever.
It wouldn't work on an upright.
Yeah,
Oh,
Oh.
okay.
we need one for an
Need one
upright.
for an upright,
Just follow
So does
your
that
gut.
mean that the Steinway factory didn't?
Perfectly consistent over 100 years.
Amazing.
It still feels really tight.
Excuse my
yeah. Oh,
reach.
you're good.
Knuckles line up.
I'm curious, so ones should,
Is that for weight or strength? Or springs?
Yeah.
A whole bunch of hypothetical things that have never been tested.
Oh, yeah.
And they don't number them.
Yeah, they
Nope.
don't number 'em
Wow.
either. That's crazy.
Yeah, that was kind of a good catch. Perfect timing to find
Yeah, just in time.
just in time.
Good thing I messed up that first one.
I know. I don't think it was the piano soul saying, "Stop, Scott."
I like how you think, Stacy.
Really, I just never would have.
Brian.
Yeah, nice catch. That was.
You would never know.
I've never seen that,
You'd never see that.
but we did. Yes. All to demonstrate that this needs to be noted.
washer that also goes in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, these are more Asian pianos that do that.
And then you also want to set aside some of those to be put on later. So there'd be like one extra one for 88, and then on the rest.
I believe those are all the thin ones.
Okay.
Oh, so it's just like one section is one size, it doesn't taper at all?
I don't distinguish the difference between these.
Okay. Usually there's only. Was that one in the gallery? So 6'2".
Expensive or rental parts from standard.
Not a ton.
Really?
Are they German?
Do you notice difference?
No. I notice a difference in my sales.
Steer away from or
Like the
gravitate
Renner
towards the Renner.
Renner hammers are softer.
Um,
voicing.
I don't know that I can even answer that. I would say yeah, I don't know. I don't know that I could necessarily say that people are honestly the only pianos that people sit down and say, wow, this piano is amazing, are the Highlands. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Especially if
More of those thicker shanks.
Yeah. Especially if they don't know.
There's probably just more I haven't taken off yet.
That's right.
Okay.
Marketing in them, and it affects how they respond to you. I'll notice that.
That's true.
I do notice that too.
You're right.
Depends on the product.
a lot of the 218s that we've had, 70% of them are better than the Steinway Grand I've played.
That's amazing.
Overall, there's some things that are better or worse.
Yes.
The overall feeling. and
Have to
stuff.
tell Paul that. Well done.
Is it wasabi seaweed?
No, I can find those ones that were out. It's just sea salt and oil.
Best kind.
Anybody like seaweed?
So good. For your thyroid?
Yeah, thyroid.
They're kind of Japanese potato chips.
Yeah. Much healthier, maybe.
Mm-hmm.
If you think
My
it's
kids bring that to
healthier,
school like every day, the seaweed. They love it.
you want some, Scott?
They call it salt gum.
Gotta get this done. Maybe in a bit.
The
Oh, so
There's a Steinway upright that I put hammers in, and it had the same style of rail
Mm-hmm.
with this fabric on it.
Yeah.
But the fabric,
I don't know what it's supposed to do.
like keeps less play from happening when you loosen and tighten, or at least that's what.
Another Steinway thing.
Tightening the hammers down, they move side to side a lot more than with the.
Hmm.
So I ended up putting that sticky name board felt down on it.
Did it make
And it
much
made it-
difference?
Made it a lot better. Yeah, it made it so I didn't have to nearly as much.
So do you have plenty of extras for section ends? Of the right sizes?
I believe so. I still haven't swapped out.
There's 3 extras. You can start taking these ones off. So that's where these will go. let's see.
Well, how
These
far?
three?
So they're,
Where
you
do
just
the
need
thin
three more.
ones begin?
5 total.
Are the rest of these all the same size?
Yeah.
Okay, so
And then there's 3 right here.
See between the Ringer hammers and the kind we usually use, they taper differently. Like the length of the core on one of them, I forget which one, stays the same, but the felt changes in length. But then I think these ones, like both the wood and the felt, change in their taper. I have to look at them side by side. But I noticed that it was made the hammers slightly different than I'm used to.
Yeah, we have
So these all seem to be fairly tight. Like when I try to move them back and forth, there's just that much play.
Okay.
I like a bit more than that, just in case something like that happens.
Okay.
So I might go through and just put them all through these two real quick.
just to give you a little more
Like,
margin for error.
can't really show it here, but lining up the cores of the hammers between the two brands ends up making the bore distance slightly different as you go down the line with these.
Steinway hammers.
Yeah, rather than these ones tend to stay the bore distance stays the same, and something about the way their taper changes, but then on these ones it's like,
The core changes.
yeah, and it's almost like the bore distance needs to be changed to that,
Oh, interesting.
at least the last time. It's,
That you get to change your bore distance as you go.
yeah, it's very handy.
Right.
Okay. Let's try to see.
All right, here we go.
Do Gabriel's elbow.
And go.
There we go. Check and make Check. check for drips. That's it.
It's a flat surface across the, like replicating strings.
It is
So that way you can just adjust the angle that way instead of having to rely on samples. Maybe slightly off most of the time. These hard ones.
Only if they start out a little bit tight, which these did. Actually, yeah, I think I always do.
Okay. Smart.
But they're gonna fit. Right.
Do that with the
You're pretty
uprights.
calm under that pressure there, though, Scott. I was pretty impressed. Good in a
Scott is the
crisis.
most calm person.
Yeah.
Next to Joe, at least.
Yeah, you guys are all pretty calm, actually. Wish I could hide it. Oh, that's what I need to learn, to not hide my
We're all
freaking
freaking
out.
out just as much
Oh,
as
that makes me feel better. I know, it's like,
Life is far stranger than we can suppose.
Spacing's a little off, but we'll fix that later.
looks good.
Let's see, James,
On track?
but I think it was
Brian's turn.
So when you're dry fitting it, what are you checking for?
Just how much play there is forward and back.
So it can be adjusted as needed.
Yeah, okay.
That's pretty good.
And
So I push it up against the rail on the bottom, and then see how much.
see if it'll
move
rest
forward.
against the.
Yeah, and then I like to kind of like lift it up and then see if it'll go back at all, like this way. So
Bigger.
yeah, I'd ream it out a
Just
bit more.
so you can, that's cool.
I like to have a little bit of movement both ways outside of the jig. So I usually just stick it in as far as it'll go and then take off a bit more.
Okay.
Yeah.
You can now have yours.
You should let me make the shop meeting food. Because I made this pumpkin cheese ball and it was the cutest thing I'd ever seen. It was super cute. And then I made a veggie tray, but it looked like a skeleton. Because like the ribs were like the peppers and it was super cute. That would be fun. You should let me do that.
Shot made in 2 days.
Yeah, it's in like 2 days. So.
Sounds good.
I'll make it on Thursday and I'll bring it
Do
Friday.
you wanna, take Jacob's? Jacob usually goes and gets.
I'll
food.
ask him first. If he's cool with it, then I'll do it.
Why don't you,
Because that'd be fun.
he has a
Shakes, or do these come
$50 budget
pre-made?
for
Mhm.
food every shop meeting.
Okay.
So why don't you take that budget? and
Definitely
pay
do
all
that.
this to- Okay.
Will he be sad if I take his?
No.
Are you That'd be really fun, actually.
And, you know, we may play tough, but all of us deep down inside, we want skeleton veggie trays and which cheese balls, pumpkin cheese balls.
Okay. There's fun ways to eat healthy food. Always.
Is a cheese ball healthy?
Yeah.
Okay.
Cheese is healthy.
I will accept that.
You're kidding me?
Oh, did I not? That's my bad.
Mm,
Sorry. It's alright.
Okay, so cheese and crackers, veggie tray. I can make them look Halloweenish.
Yeah, that's
And
good.
then, what else? We need like, do you guys, I can make some chocolate too. We should have at least one thing
Glue's
that's
a
like,
little light on the top side, so I might put a little
and
more on
we
the next
could
one.
do,
Side, so the collar's just a
I
little
do
bit
make pretty
thin.
good like cider, but it's hot. Some of the other like fit. I'll figure out something.
You want to get plenty of glue, but not so much that it'll start dripping.
Alright.
Chocolate binds with opioid receptors in the
It's a,
body.
yeah, it's a delivery. Sugar does that too.
Also falling in love.
Yeah, that's true. That's the best way. Running really hard does it
Beta
too.
endorphin.
Yeah. So many ways to be happy.
Endogenous opioids. Satisfaction with a good set of hammers.
See,
Especially when the collar looks like perfectly round.
yeah, I've seen
Which
some.
like never happens.
I've seen a few like
but
that.
Sometimes it does.
Hey, Cheerio. No, it's the closest thing I could think.
Probably the closest thing in size.
Yeah. You guys eat? What do you guys eat for breakfast? I guess I'm hungry because I'm talking about food.
I like to eat cereal called Dee's cereal. It's got
D's like D.
DEE.
DEES. It's like I've not got much of a collar again. It's got a whole bunch of stuff in it.
Like greenish.
Yeah,
Like
yeah,
Like-
it's
Very whole
It's
grain.
got like amaranth. It's got
Oh,
chia. It's
Like
got
good grains, like ancient grains. cool.
Oats,
Ergot
wheat,
infested
quinoa, etc., etc., etc.
Cool.
But they also put like apple cinnamon flavor. So they have dried fruit. They have
It's like
That they add
granola.
into
for-
it.
Yum.
um,
I usually do green juice, but it's too cold this time of year to drink cold juice in the morning now. Gotta switch it up.
I usually just eat a early lunch. I wake up in the morning if I eat something.
Still wait then.
My dreams
still
spoil my
not
appetite.
great on the color.
So there's a tiny bit of space.
I've been trying to
Pull
juice all my
back a little
beets.
bit.
Beet.
That's good. To
Yeah.
help. So there's always a lot that comes out the back, right?
Yeah.
So
How are you putting it on?
you can
to,
either, with the glue bottle, you can like kind of push against the side of it, like the top
To
like that,
push
so
it
it'll go
down?
around the sides.
Okay.
Or when you put the hammer on, you can kind of like push some of it off the side, so it'll go around instead of all the way through.
All right, here we go.
Nice. I appreciate the pro tips.
Yeah, Scott, you're full of pro tips today.
I found it a lot.
I got a whole bunch in the cupboard.
That's good. Look at this piano coming out. We actually need to end soon because this battery is like at 5%.
I gotta go.
Yeah. Scott, thank you for showing us hammer hanging.
This is the voice.
Should have played that. Isn't there that one
Yeah.
classical song that's about the guillotine?
Oh,
Like
the March to the
Yeah,
Scaffold.
March
by
to the Scaffold.
Berlioz.
Yeah.
Symphony Fantastique.
See if I can find it.
It's like the third or fourth.
Oh, I can't text. Do this.
It's in French, but that's where it translates to. Dun, dun,
Yep, that's it. We're gonna listen to March to the Scaffold.
I'm not sure why.
You've heard the Liszt transcription of that piece for piano solo. That's how that piece first got popular.
Yeah. It's about going to the scaffold.
Piece first came out, people
That's why they wrote it.
didn't like it. Well, it wasn't very popular. Liszt popularized it. Piano solo first.
My kids listen, I'm like, pretend someone's gonna be hung, because that's what this song is about.
Really? That looks good. Cool.
Hanging.
Another thing to
So,
yeah, mine did that too.
The only, and the only, maybe you talked about it, so you want to make sure that you're not bearing against either this straight edge here or this straight edge down here. You don't want this part here on it, because the straight edges will prevent them from going further. But
Okay.
as soon as you remove the straight edges, then they'll adjust. So what you want to be sure is that it's just barely touching down here
Okay.
and touching up here, but no more.
Kind of resting
So it's
point.
not putting any flex into the
No
shank.
flex. No flex, exactly.
okay. All right.
So, yeah, we're done. I guess we have 5% battery, so we have no choice.
Yep.
See you next week, next Wednesday morning.